Welcome to the Hire Truckers Podcast, where we interview experts in driver recruiting. We provide industry insights, marketing trends, and motivation to help you level up your recruiting game. Welcome to the Hire Truckers Podcast. This is Craddock, and I am your host. Today we have Brad Hackett joining us. Brad is a seasoned driver recruitment executive with over 15 years experience working in operations, logistics, recruitment technology, and in director of recruitment roles. Over the past few years, Brad pushes the boundaries around process and team improvements. Brad is currently serving as the Director of Recruiting and Retention at Novalines. I always enjoy his positive posts on LinkedIn and his professional development wins, and that's part of why I reached out to Brad to have him on the show. So welcome, Brad.
Awesome, Aaron. I really appreciate the introduction and having me on. Before we get started, I really just wanted to say not only how passionate I am about these topics for our industry and leaders collaborating, but also just the discussion amongst leadership. There's this weird stigma. I don't know if you've seen it as well. I don't know if it's specific to trucking or just leaders in general, but a lot of default mode of keeping things really close to chest and not sharing. And I just love the collaboration amongst leaders, discussion, best practices, and us working together to help each other win.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed, being in the industry around 12 years is, just the hesitancy to share best practices and things. And so when we launched Trucking Clicks and got back into driver recruitment about two and a half years ago, like we put in our vivid vision, like, hey, we're going to publicly share the best practices, marketing tips, like even what we do to help fleets be successful and just facilitate a conversation. And because one of the things I noticed in our industry is the tendency to not share, first is to not celebrate other people's wins. And so I want our entire team to celebrate other vendors, other technologies, things, because I think one of the things you had mentioned to me when we chatted, there's a big enough market, there's enough market share for all of us. Like we don't have to, hold things close to our chest and like keep them as protected secrets. Like, hey, this, even on the marketing side, like this Google strategy can, with your first 10% of your budget, get you 5 times the results. Like, let's just share it and, get it out there in the market. And then that puts pressure on the vendor side, like that I'm on, that, hey, we can't be doing the same thing 6 months from now, or we're going to be out of a job. And so, but that just makes the whole market better. If we all share the information, everybody gets better at the same time. And then, on the vendor side, that we just provide a more competitive, product for you. So I think we can celebrate each other's success and then share things both on the vendor side and then amongst recruiters. Like I know, just several directors of recruiting in my network that share with 5 others, like, hey, here's this strategy that's working for me. Here's this vendor that's working for me. Here's this technology that's working for me. And we all get better. And it's not, that if they get better, you're going to be out of a job because they're going to beat you. It's just kind of a completely different mindset. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And we're on the same page there. So, and our goal kind of this show today and most of our shows is just add as much value to the industry as possible. Like, how can we help executives, improve how they run their teams, how they communicate with their recruiting department and other and retention departments. And then, how can, what it might be that somebody gets one little tip out of this show that improves retention by 10% or 5%. And like, it's hard to even put a dollar value on that when you're dealing with, a 200 plus truck fleet, for instance. So,
yeah, we're all spending immense amounts of budget and a ton of time, big teams, big goals. And as you mentioned, Aaron, there's plenty of marketplace for us all to win, and firmly believe leaning in each other, iron sharpening iron, and us all improving creates a healthy competition and healthy dialogue for us to drive each other forward.
That's right. And so the first section that we talk about on the show is industry insights. And so my first question on that is, what data should recruiters pull and measure success on to be metric driven in their recruitment improvement?
Great question, Aaron. One thing, I spent a decade in operations before being thrown in this wild world of driver marketing, recruiting, onboarding, retention kind of sector here. First thing there is make sure your ATS and the vendors that you use, the data starts with what is feeding your funnel. So understanding your funnel, those key metrics, your cost per lead that's entering into your ATS, how are you converting those leads to applications? What does your approval process time look like internally as the drivers go through those steps? Those are key areas for not only your recruiters to help fine tune and maximize their skills, but also to make those financial decisions that you're spending a lot of money on all of those efforts, making sure you're not dropping candidates through each of those steps, and then also fine tuning those adjustments so that you can maximize your spend and ultimately get the best performance out of your marketing and your recruiting efforts.
Yeah, so if you had to dive into that a little deeper, like, and let's say you're coming into a new recruiting department and you don't know your cost per hire, cost per lead, percentages through to orientation, approval rate, all of those things, like where do you even start?
Yeah, I believe you have to start with your process and the ATS that you use. If anybody in this space is not using an applicant tracking system, you got to get one to get set up. That's your source of truth for all of your driver data. There's several major players out there that do a fantastic job of setting up all of your driver data and all of the intricate processes that we have to put drivers through, regulatory and internal processes included, to help get through each of those steps. So with that, your funnel starts with what's feeding into that. So your marketing efforts, making sure you have that set up with your referral codes or whatever that looks like within your ATS to have that trackability top of funnel and throughout that process.
That's great. So specifically, kind of, I know you've been with 1,000+ truck fleet, and then you're with a approximately 350 truck fleet now. So as you've come into these recruiting departments and improved both retention and cost per hire metrics, like what are the most influential changes that you've made in these fleet recruiting departments?
Yeah, first thing is making sure that you're making good decisions and equipping your team with good and accurate data. So data-driven, concise, and consistent recruiting information that's in front of your recruiters that builds confidence in what they're selling. It creates that link between sales, what they're bringing into the organization, operations, what they're delivering day in and day out, and having that with the recruiters that this is what Mr. or Mrs. Driver we're going to be able to confidently deliver with coming into our organization. So what we've done, I did both at Venture, like you said, 1,000+ fleet, as well as Nova Lines, about 350 trucks today, is making sure those recruiters not only understand, but they've got a great structure, clear structure of what each of those jobs look like. So they understand the position that they're recruiting for. They've got the actual data in front of them of this is what we're delivering on. This is what the drivers should expect from revenue to deductions to take home pay and each of those intricate benefits of your program, both pros and cons. So that equips them with what that driver is actually going to experience with your organization. And you can get in front of any of those areas that could be a potential roadblock and build that confidence with the recruiters. So having that data driven and also the clear structure, so it's ease of access. As recruiters have so many steps in the process, a lot of those conversations with the drivers, being able to reference that information quickly for their confidence and their accuracy in what they're speaking with those prospective candidates is extremely key.
So even something as simple as just confidence in the job offer, that they have clear numbers. Have you seen that, make a tangible impact?
Yeah, one of the things we found when I was at Venture, they had a really complex, awesome model with a lot of dedicated positions. Our recruiters had to recruit for over 80 jobs across the country. So you can imagine 80 jobs, 80 different potential structures of pay package, the schedule that the drivers are going to be doing, types of equipment, on down every detail that can get quite cumbersome to keep up with. What we found in organizing that and getting it concise is getting that quick access to the recruiters makes those conversations a lot more fluid between the driver and the recruiter, and equipping them with that accurate information to go off of. But what was surprising, Aaron, that we found and found in several instances here is by doing that research, there are certain positions that you're spot on. You're recruiting exactly what you're delivering for, which is great. But we found both ends of the spectrum of some we were overselling to drivers, leading to unnecessary turnover. And we were selling this number and only delivering on this number. So making that adjustment so you have truth in what you're marketing to, recruiting to is beneficial for sure. But also we found some other ends of the spectrum as well. We were advertising and speaking to, say, $1,200 take home a week, and the drivers were getting $1,450. So getting that level set of data-driven pieces of information to go off of to sell exactly what you're going to be able to deliver confidently.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we focus on at Trucking Clicks is just radical honesty. And I think that that's kind of what you're equipping your recruiters with is honesty. And I think I've seen with a lot of recruiting departments that they'll oversell the position. I think that's the most common. And, whether it's regards to promising more home time than they actually get, or pay, like, hey, you're going to get this much when, hey, the average driver may make 30% less. And so have you seen it be worth it just to, again, like, let's just be radically honest, tell the driver even the pain points? Like, do you ever even dive into, here are the pain points of a position?
Yeah, that's one of the favorite things. We have a great team of recruiters here at Nova Lines. They do a fantastic job. We work together as a team and collaborate extremely well. But one of those areas, especially in the market shifts that we've seen, some radical market shifts here in the last couple of years, is that the radical candor and the honesty and upfrontness is so much more appreciated by those drivers, of being able to say, this is what we're going to be able to deliver on. We're not selling you with this gimmicky bonus program or hopes and dreams of X, Y, or Z with our program. We're an over-the-road flatbed lease purchase company at Nova Lines. That's all we do. That's our specialty. So getting in front of the drivers, got to be willing to tarp majority of the time. It's December here in the Midwest. We get some crazy weather swings across the country, dealing in the elements, not so fun sometimes. Our drivers lease purchase, they got to stay out 2+ weeks at a time. If a driver's looking for that consistent daily home time, we're not a fit for them. So items like that of being real and upfront with the drivers, of not only financially and equipment wise and operationally what you're going to expect at your organization, but also addressing those potential hurdles upfront in a recruiting conversation where you may be a fantastic candidate, meet all the criteria, but if our home time isn't a fit for what you're looking for, let's wish you the best and get you on your way, and not lead you along on false pretenses or vagueness in your recruiting talking points. Let's just go ahead and be upfront and honest from that throughout the entire conversation.
Now, I'm kind of curious. So then do you shift those, like relabel those in your ATS? Like if it's not a good fit, just like not interested, like what status would you put on that?
Yeah, extremely passionate on accurate data in your ATS. So extremely powerful tools with automation, and every system, no matter what you use, any industry, it's only as good as the data and the processes that you put into it. So we would put, say a driver is not interested in home time for our program, we'd mark them as a not interested status. And then we've got an appropriate label for that within our ATS of it's home time related. So we can potentially reach back out with some marketing in the future to see if their home time, what they're looking for, potentially changed. Areas like that within your system there.
Yeah, or your offer may change. I mean, you never know. Because I see some fleets not doing that, like not reclassifying, like just, hey, let's leave it there. And then they just have inaccurate data on, and then they have a new recruiter come in and reach out to that guy that's already been contacted.
Right. He's already told you 6 months ago, it's not for me. And you're spamming them and wasting, not only spamming them and annoying the candidate, but wasting your precious time of your recruiter that could be spent with candidates that are actually interested.
Yeah. Yeah. And with good notes, you can call back and say, hey, I know this was home time related, like, and then again, it's that touch point, back to what they said. It's that instant credibility, like, oh, they're actually looking out for me. And then you can get in another conversation, because sometimes that does change.
Right. How powerful is a conversation that, say, we had a certain truck type a year ago that the driver wasn't a big fan of, and we mark the notes and we get a new truck delivery of the model that they're looking for, and you proactively reaching out and say, hey, Aaron, I know we spoke last year. You were looking for that Freightliner. We just got a delivery of Freightliners. Is this something you're still looking for? And how much weight does that have versus sitting and waiting for Aaron to potentially call us back in the future?
That's great. And so, yeah, and a lot of times these drivers are hearing from 5, 10 different fleets,
Right.
and so that may seem like something small, but you can completely differentiate, because 9 out of 10 carriers may not actually be doing that. So I love that point. So one of the things we talked about on our pre-call is talking about, like, recruiter compensation. And since our audience, a lot of it's directors of recruiting and executives in the industry, what have you kind of learned on comp packages for recruiters that both motivates them and also aligns with your company goals?
Yeah, director of recruiting is one of the toughest gigs in the game. You've got constant pressure to get the positions full, be dynamic. Sometimes you feel like you're only as good as your last recruiting class of orientation, et cetera. So first is getting that dialogue and understanding from the top down, what are your organization goals? Are we in maintenance mode, as a lot of fleets are right now with this market? Are we in rapid growth mode, going crazy aggressive to really grow the fleet? What's the urgency? Do we have to fill these positions in a month, or is it an overtime solution? By getting that understanding, you can really fine tune your incentive structure and your team structure, not only on the marketing that you're putting into the funnel, but as you mentioned, on the recruiter compensation as well. What I found is a good mix of at the time of hire and retention aspect is a good balance with the recruiters, so that they're not just focused on the quantity to get those spots full as quick as possible, but there's also that quality element to hopefully make sure that driver's equipped to stay.
So one of the things I've noticed, if it's all just get them in the door, then you can have a deviation, even if you have the values of radical honesty, which I know you do with your teams, with the drivers and giving them the best information. Sometimes you can misalign incentives, and then people try to get them in the door because then they get that, bonus or hit their numbers. So what kind of balance have you found there? Like, let's say a 90-day retention bonus, like you were talking about, versus just incentive for getting them in the door.
Yeah, again, it's really tough. You're in a tough spot as director of recruiting. You've got your recruiters that want to make as much money as possible. They want it all up front, right? And then you've got your safety operations and your leadership team that wants to keep drivers as long as possible. So I've seen everywhere across the spectrum of 100% at the time of hire. It's ops' situation to keep them, all the way to you're not getting a dime until that driver stays until 90 days. What I found is a good balance of that. I like somewhere of the 75-ish% at the time of hire. The recruiter's doing the majority of the work to get that candidate qualified, get them sold on your organization and your position, and ultimately get them sold in the door for your orientation. And then roughly that 25% left hanging out for retention to have that quality aspect. There is a balance that I particularly have found successful.
That's great. What about, like, I'm kind of curious on this. I don't know what most fleets do here, but do you have like a guaranteed base, like typically for recruiters, and then that's on top of that? Is that how that works, or is it just commission only, or is it kind of a mix in the industry?
Wide mix in the industry. I've talked with peers that they're 100% salary and they have goals and hold their team accountable. And I've talked with others that you've got several contracted only positions that they have to get hires or they're not getting paid at all. Again, I kind of like that balance of a livable wage that is not a crazy high salary, but then really having a crystal clear and simple incentive structure so that your most hungry recruiters that are going to do the most work and get the most hires can make a really good amount of money. but it's not so top heavy that your lowest performer is also highly compensated there. So I kind of like that balance of a pretty solid base and then an aggressive, simple, and defined bonus structure on top of that that's really clear for them to understand. One last thing on the compensation for recruiters. Don't get stuck in the box. I'd recommend on your incentive structure that you've got for your team. One of my favorite things that I've done over the years is I call them sprints, like a short term, like, hey, this month we need X number of drivers for ABC dedicated account. We're looking to get that full. Anybody that gets drivers hired, we've obviously got our transparent and clear, simple to understand bonus program for you. But for this month, we're going to run whoever gets the most hires gets a couple $100 Amazon gift card and make it a team short term. I call it a sprint. So you're sprinting after that goal for that particular time frame. Creates that extra oomph and that extra dynamic with your team. And hopefully you can have some fun with your team around that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a former director of recruiting for CRST. So like say the same thing. He's like the most motivating thing we've ever done, like for our team, like that has that collaboration. And sometimes they fight after more than, even the comp, which is significantly more, is those gift cards and just the thought of, hey, we recognize what you do. And then I think also it's just that camaraderie of, and like team building and competitive spirit and growth mindset as a team. I think it just, the cultural implications are crazy, just of little things like that, whether it's like unrecognized gift cards, like unplanned, just, hey, we weren't, we just noticed the extra effort you put in this month and here, but then also those pre-planned incentives and sprints. I like the way you word that. Do you do that like typically every month or quarterly or just ad hoc? Like how do you kind of decide when you're going to do that?
A little bit ad hoc. As we know in trucking, the goals change constantly on that. When there's a big dire need, like to throw that out, it probably balances to one solid, one a quarter. And if you get a tie, I would recommend an epic rock, paper, scissors battle like I've had in the past for a $200 gift card. That makes it extra spicy for them.
That's awesome. Today's sponsor. Do you hire truck drivers in hard to fill areas, or do you need help creating efficiency in your recruiting department? You're not alone. With 50 plus years experience, Trucking Click specializes in data-driven strategies, industry-leading customer experience, and custom solutions that'll get you to your goal. Trucking Clicks is your go-to place for high-quality, direct leads at scale. Visit truckingclicks.com or call 512-982-0816 today. What other things do you do to kind of build relationship with your department, like with your recruiting department?
That constant dialogue, I know a lot. Like my team is 100% remote. I work hybrid at the terminal every couple of weeks in Chicago. And then I'm in Indianapolis. We've got a couple in Chicago, one in Alabama, one in Kansas. So that remote environment makes that it's got tons of pros and cons working remote or hybrid, but it makes it harder to have those interpersonal conversations and those small, you can't pop by somebody's office and say, hey, Sue, how was your weekend? How's things going? You have to go through an extra barrier to have those conversations. So being intentional on that is extremely key. Managing a team like that of not only getting your one-on-ones set up and consistent, that constant engagement, team chat, team calls, but also just that communication. You almost have to over communicate even more in that environment than you would have in person.
Yeah. We actually, with Trucking Clicks and Hire Truckers teams, are mostly remote. Like I have two people in Austin with me, and then everybody else is remote. And I used to think that having a conversation around like, how was your weekend or whatever, like, because I was purely business minded, was like a waste of time and wasting company resources. Like that probably sounds insensitive, but that's really the way I thought. But I've just found, like, I mean, we spend more time working with our coworkers than a lot of times with our family, after hours and on weekends. And so it's just so important to build those relationships and have those conversations about life. Like it's not just about filling trucks. It's about, what are your goals outside of work? What's a big win? One of the things we do in our leadership meeting every Monday as we go through and we're like, hey, what's one personal win from the last week? And it's been anything from got a new dog to, hit a workout goal or read this new book, or I mean, really anything. Like my win from this last week is like I took a weekend with just my dad and my 3.5-year-old and just planned a little trip to a VRBO and hung out, and completely not work related, but it's important with in-office teams, but exponentially more important with fully remote teams. I've kind of found now to get the best talent, like post COVID, at least for us, like we have to go remote and like let people, if you want the best of the best in the industry, you got to let them work from wherever. And it just, it's kind of changed everything. And then we try to get the team in person quarterly. So like every 3 months, like how can we get everybody together or most of the team together somewhere? So maybe, Mid America Truck Show or Women in Trucking, maybe we tack it on to another event and just get as many people as we can together. Super, super important.
Very nice.
So next we'll go into the section on just marketing trends. So what are you testing now, or have you tested in the past few months in your marketing?
One of the things that I'm a big fan of that has been a shift, not only with myself, but some industry peers, and this again goes back to that power of networking and collaboration amongst, is if you look during COVID, everybody was in hyper growth mode, can't get drivers in fast enough, growing like wild across the entire industry. A lot of that brought out some weird bonuses out there. We were going after sign-on bonus chasing. There was a lot of, you had to be the top one in your sector in the marketing, or you felt like you're not going to get candidates. I've seen a lot of shift, and I think it's definitely for the best of pulling back on that and in the mindset of more, let's undersell and over deliver and speak with confidence about what's real and what we're actually going to be able to deliver, rather than just try to throw the highest dollar or manipulate marketing potentially to look like you're 1% better than your peer down the road is one of the things I've seen.
Yeah. Like what have the results kind of look like on a high level just over the last 12 to 18 months?
A lot more candidates per position for sure, where again, speaking to during COVID, you couldn't get drivers in fast enough that everybody was trying to get drivers in. And now a lot more fleets like ourselves are closer to that full mark for your fleet. So it's more the quality focus, really vetting out the candidate. I've seen a lot of hiring guideline shifts in the last couple of years as well, where when you're trying to bring in as much as possible, a lot of carriers kind of loosened up on those hiring guidelines, whether that's accidents or number of jobs or experience in that. Seen a lot more fleets, ourselves included, pull that back in to, again, lean on that quality candidate more so than the quantity that has been a major focus the last couple of years.
I remember for a season, it was like going from like post COVID, like going from, okay, well, you need 2 years experience. Okay, now you only need 1 month or one
Yeah.
year experience. Now you only need 9 months experience, and then 2 weeks later, 6 months experience. And most fleets like bottomed out at 3 months experience, like even for OTR levels. And then now I'm seeing, like you're saying, kind of the inverse of, all right, 2 years experience, or hey, I'm only bringing on the guys that are the best of the best with 10 years, 15 years experience, now that trucks are full.
Yep.
I've seen just major, it's crazy how quickly this industry can swing, massively. And I think we saw, I've been through four cycles of recruitment, kind of downturns and spot rate changes. And this last one was the most aggressive. Just, I mean, it was wild. And sometimes their departments had to increase their budget, like on just the paid marketing side, like 4x.
Right.
And then now we've kind of seen a reversal of that this past year to 18 months. The last section, which I get most excited about, and particularly with you, is around mindset and motivation. Because I'm always encouraged by your just like, hey, have a great week posts. And if you're not following Brad on LinkedIn, I would recommend you give Brad Hackett a follow. So what do you think mindset should be of a recruiting director, kind of as you've been in multiple roles in that capacity over the last couple of years, last decade or so?
Yeah, Aaron, I fully believe mindset starts everything. Like everything drives from the attitude and mindset that you bring to anything in life. Again, we're all wired very uniquely to be those that are in this sector, and our recruiting directors. We've got really tough gigs out there. We've got really short-term, aggressive, big problems to solve for our organization. We've got a sales recruiting team that we've got to lead and keep motivated. And as you mentioned, with all of the market swings, you have to keep up not only organization wise, but delivering that message, over communicating to your team. There's a lot on our shoulders. So all that to be said, I don't think it's been a mindset of mine that it's really wasted time if we're either negatively focused or talking down about any other person, either internally or externally. And I've just seen compound, not only in my personal life, but professional life, the power of building each other up, having each other's backs, showing each other that, hey, we really do care about each other. And even if we're competitors in the space, like I said before, there's plenty of market share. We all can win here. And I would much rather live in an internal circle and world where we're building each other up and leaning on each other and iron sharpening iron than one that's poking and prodding and trying to find any way to put a peer down.
Yeah, one of the terms I heard you say when we were discussing some of this earlier is like, you mentioned it a little bit just now, but touch more on like reserved optimism. Like, what is that, and why should a recruiting director be in that posture, and also just top executive leadership?
Yeah, I like the phrase reserved optimism, because in recruiting, again, our entire approach is sales. We're selling our organization to prospective candidates for them to come on board and join our organization. So if you're not at least leaning on the optimism and positivity of that, I'd question you're maybe in the wrong role there. But you can't also, with that, you can't be overly optimistic, overly aggressive, and go wild, because this market is really complicated. We have a lot of factors at play, a lot of things that are way above our head, industry trends, rates, things of that nature with interest rates, et cetera. So you want to lean into that optimism, but in a reserved function to not only have attainable goals with your leadership team and your day-to-day team, but also not be too aggressive at the same time.
Yeah, how do you keep the line of communication open? Let's say like with the C-suite that is really looking at the P&L, like both on the you know downswing when freight rates are down, the companies are less profitable, not decreasing recruiting spend too much, but then also on the upside, like when you do need more budget and there's an opportunity to pick up market share, how do you keep that line of communication open so that you don't make a decision at the wrong time that could cause massive negative impact down the road?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important, especially director level. We're managing teams of teams. We're in a unique spot, usually close to leadership, and also having to manage downstream as well. So managing upstream with your C-suite or your leadership team is getting alignment on what those goals are. What are we shooting for as a team? What's that look like the next quarter? What's that look like the next year? What's that look like the next month? So not only just week over week, getting inundated in the day to day and getting very short term focus there, but aligning that and getting the clear and concise data to discuss, have good dialogue on what we're doing, where we're pointed, where we're aligned to, not only week to week, month to month, but looking out quarters and a year ahead where we're going.
Yeah, so that's kind of my question, is like, how far out do you plan? How frequently should, again, in an ideal situation, I know you've worked in a few different roles, but how often ideally should you be doing that, and how far out should you be planning?
I like our structure at Nova Lines. We've got a weekly cadence with our executive leadership team and the other departmental leaders. So we're discussing what's right in front of us. What's the outlook look like? How's our turnover? How's our class size? making sure we're balancing that to keep a good fleet level with where we're at. But then also on that monthly or quarterly basis, having that more long-term discussion that, yeah, you're going to have your week to week of what that's going to look like, but especially alignment up the chain of command so that you're planning as a team, you're planning in that dialogue in the same direction that they want to go, and you can reiterate that. So I'd say monthly or quarterly on those more long-term discussions.
That's great. And then one of the questions we had that came in from LinkedIn, again, I'd recommend you follow both Brad and I on LinkedIn because we always ask, what you want on the show. So the question from Ginger is, last week I had a director of recruiting ask me, what can I do to reduce driver ghosting between an approved application through safety and manager approval all the way to orientation?
Yeah, it's a solid question. A lot of us, we're spending a ton of money, ton of time investment to get these candidates qualified and hopefully in the door. And there's probably nothing worse in this space than you have a candidate that's rock solid on paper, has given you the verbal commitments, and then they no show to your orientation this morning when you expect them to be there. So I've not talked to anybody that's 100% on this. I don't think anybody as amazing as any team or any structure can be is going to get that way. But I found success in leaning into a couple areas to help improve the show rate from here to here. Not quite perfection, but definitely a lot closer than where we were months prior. A couple of things that we've done is the clarity of the communication with the drivers, looking at what emails, what texts are going out from the recruiters during that process. So you've got that driver, you're actively recruiting them. They want to go the next step to submit that full app, get them approved. The clarity of communication, what does that next step look like, Mr. or Mrs. Driver, so they can expect what's going to be that next step. As we all know, drivers are talking to often multiple carriers. I think 10th Street shared at a recent conference on average 5 from what they've seen with their data. I've seen elsewhere that so you're basically competing with 5 sets of information with that given candidate. So the clarity of your messaging is astronomically important so that they can reference that, understand what those next steps look like. On down the pipe, when that driver is fully approved, we get them scheduled for orientation. Another thing that we've done that's one of the favorite things that I do in my role, even at the director level, is getting a management touch point with that driver. So the Friday before their orientation, I'm calling every single driver individually and going over a solid checklist of making sure they understand our program, making sure they have all of their flight rental car information, making sure it's clear on how our hotel works when they land. So easing that candidate of what's going to be that process of them coming on, because it's a big decision. They're making a big job change. It's a life-changing decision for them to come on board with your company. So anything that you can do to not only solidify their decision to come on board with as much clarity and information and conciseness as you can, but also to make them feel the warm and welcome to your organization, that somebody from executive management is taking 20 minutes out of their time to introduce them, make sure that they've got all their questions answered, and that they feel comfortable coming on board with Nova Lines or whatever company you're working with.
Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of data, I'm very much a data guy, being in primarily the marketing vendor space. So like, what kind of pickup, like just that management touch point, or just some touch point that Friday before, like, does that increase show rate 5%, 2%, 10%? Like, again, just ballpark.
Across all of our efforts, so we've done some clarity on the recruiting messaging and making sure we've got conciseness there, along with our management welcome call that I had mentioned before. We've seen a 15% increase in our show rate with those measures that we put in place.
Yeah. And see, that's amazing, like, because it's just something so simple. And so you think, like, let's say you're a fleet spending 100,000 a month or 200,000 a month, that's 15 to 30,000, like, in marketing efficiencies. Like, for instance, if you just took that could go straight to the bottom line. And then also it's also a benefit to, yeah, just the driver. That's just that personal touch, relational touch. So I would think it even has a retention impact too. So it's maybe even greater than that 15%.
Absolutely. I believe that 100%. And last thing on that is our default mode for a lot of people in this space, myself certainly included, is we're 100 miles an hour after a problem that's in front of us. We go, we get crap done. But in those driver interactions, especially at those pivotal conversations, it's super important to really slow down, do your couple minutes of research on that driver so you can have a good two-way conversation and you're not just checking a box.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, sometimes I, with the aim of getting stuff done, am short with the team, or even in personal relationships, like try to move too quickly. Yeah, when you're having that personal conversation and touch point, like just the importance of slowing down, like breathing. Sometimes I even have to like walk around, like reset, like if I know I'm in like the get stuff done mode, to put that other hat on. And so the last question to kind of wrap it up, what have you read that has been a really influential book, whether it's around mindset in the recruiting process, or just anything that's really, impacted your life both personally and professionally?
The one that sticks out, Aaron, for me, it was a couple of years ago. It's one of those books that I feel like I've come back to yearly, is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Just having that mindset of no excuses, own what's in front of you, and completely own your team, your processes, and the things that you can control. There's so much power to that. And I found so much success in that mindset shift and that frame. So that's my pick there. How about you?
Yeah, I absolutely love that book. Most recently, just because of the stage of growth we're in the business, is 10x is easier than 2x.
Okay.
And it's by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. They're the authors also of Who Not How and The Gap and the Gain, which are also two incredible books. And yeah, just, similar to the extreme ownership concept, just, there's the aspect of you own it, like, how do I get to 10x? But then there's also the aspect of like creating that vision. Because I'm a big believer of just, if you take the time to slow down and think about that long-term vision, and with our business we have a lot of growth goals ahead of us. Like we've 10x'd in the last 2.5 years, and we have our goals to 10x a couple more times, and continue to grow and add value. And yeah, so 10x is easier than 2x. And then honestly, I'd read the whole trilogy. I'd start with like Who Not How, Gap and the Gain, and then 10x is easier than 2x. Like the Gap and the Gain specifically is about, so often we get caught up in, where am I falling short now, like the gap, rather than, where am I now, like relative to where was I a year ago. And just, especially, amongst high achievers, like we can be kind of have a lot of negative self-talk around, well, oh, I'm still not doing this perfect. And kind of like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, just, you're never going to be perfect. Like with, getting people to show up for orientation, or, you might have that one recruiting class that you typically get 20 to 40 in, and you get 5.
Right.
And, it's just, and you just have to keep putting in the reps. And extreme ownership, like you said, looking at the data. Yeah, I love that book as well. Yeah, so I really appreciate your time today, Brad. I enjoy our conversations as always, and I think we added a lot of value to the community. And so I really, really appreciate you taking this time. And yeah, so this is Aaron Craddock with the Hired Truckers podcast, and we appreciate you joining today. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Our goal with the Hired Truckers podcast is to provide industry insights, marketing trends, and motivation to level up your recruiting game. If we added value, take a few seconds to share this with your network. Have a great week.